Today's guest is Mary Rodwell, who is recognized internationally as one of Australia's leading researchers in the UFO and contact phenomenon. She is an author, and she has produced two EBE award-winning documentaries. She is national and international lecturer and has appeared regularly on national and international media news programs. Let's welcome today's guest, Mary Rodwell. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you for inviting me, Adam.
Yes, it's very interesting for me to make connections with specific people who have a deeper connection that what lies beneath, the surface itself, and to make connections with the energies that we sometimes stumble across in our own lives, in our own path, and that interconnection between different people. Um, so for me, I know for yourself, for example, that you were in the UK, working in a different profession than you are presently now. Um, working in a nursing position, I believe, working with different people in the hospitals, and then transitioning from in 1994 to more of a holistic approach towards, I guess, towards life itself. Maybe you could just share how that exactly took place.
Well, I always thought I end up being a nurse or a mid. I was a midwife as well after nursing, but having a family after that, I was invited to explore counselling at the local general practice, which fascinated me because I realised that a lot of illness basically stems from really unhappiness, emotional trauma, psychological trauma. And that interested me more, to prevent rather than treat a disease is to prevent it if possible.
Yeah.
That led me into exploring more of the holistic way of healing. I ended up, I call it my midlife crisis, dragging my family over to Australia because I felt that it was the last chance for a bit of an adventure with the family
Right.
and stayed in counselling rather than going back to nursing. With that was interesting because I was doing grief and bereavement, and there were people there. I was working with hospice, and people were, exploring life after death. What do you think, Mary, if they're facing their own mortality? And also exploring it for myself, the whole issue of reincarnation. What did that all mean? And, how could I help those that were exploring the greater picture, especially when they're facing, their own mortality or lost somebody very dear to them.
Right.
So that sort of got me exploring more. I read many, many books on it and eventually learned how to do past life regressions myself. I decided that that was fascinating. I'd had a couple of experiences where I'd had the experience myself of going into what we now call past lives
Right.
and really amazed at what was coming to me in that state. And things that I knew nothing of were coming up and telling me, well, Mary, you were actually a soldier at one point, a Roman soldier, and this kind of thing, and talking about things I had no knowledge of consciously. So that fascinated me because I found some phobias that people have are directly related to trauma in what we'd call past lives.
Yes.
In all of that was an invite to explore more of the multidimensional reality, which meant, looking at remote healing, energy work, you name it, channeling the whole bizzo, and ultimately realizing that we all have the potential to tap into our multidimensional reality. That it was not just specific people that had the talent; they were the ones that perhaps hadn't been programmed out of it or honored it, so they were able to continue with it. But we all have that ability because that's what it proved to me was because I didn't ever expect to be able to do or tap into any of that because I always saw myself as pretty grounded and pretty normal, but finding myself having experiences connecting with intelligences. And that led into me realizing people were having contact with non-human intelligences, as well as the angelic realm, ascended masters, and all the ones we all hear of, the elementals and this kind of thing. So it broadened my perspective into a more cosmic way of looking at our connection to spirit, but also to other intelligences, which, as far as I'm concerned, are not just the physical ones. We're talking about interdimensionals, extra dimensionals, transdimensionals, beings potentially from our future as well. So, in other words, realizing that time wasn't linear, that we are able to tap into all of this awareness that's held within, I suspect, our holographic DNA. So this is after so many, many years of research, talking to many thousands of people, having experiences with families, and their experiences are quite extraordinary. Because one of the things, Adam, that I found quite fascinating is in interviews being asked, have you got some particularly extraordinary cases? And my answer would be, multiples of them are extraordinary. There's not just one particular one, it's just different depending on their perceptions, their awareness, and their contact, and how real they've come to accept it as being.
Right.
But extraordinary, to me, everyone is capable of this, tapping into that consciousness, that greater awareness of who we are. But the stories that come from that are all, many, many cases quite extraordinary.
Yeah, what's interesting is the fact that we when we go through the path of the dark night of the soul, and we
Yeah.
somehow go down that rabbit hole of not only information but on an energetic frequency, and we work on ourselves individually. What's amazing is the amount, or not the amount, I should say, but the types of individuals that cross our path, or the people that come into our energy field, that are not only attracted to the energy itself, but also it's a relatable field. And I've noticed that myself, as I mentioned to you earlier a little bit. And for me, I think that expansion has led me to a greater understanding of not only myself, but of the universe itself. And for you, for example, I know as we were born into certain religions, and religion itself has a way of capping our understanding or our expansion. Did that have an impact on your early life, or in terms of your development or your interest in the subject that you do now?
It's a good question, Adam, and absolutely. I was brought up in a more Orthodox Catholic religion, which was interesting and useful in the sense that I can now understand when someone comes to me with that kind of background, their reservations around exploring this on a multidimensional level, given the programming that is part of that religion. One of the things that started me questioning, because I was, a very spiritual young girl, and I was very much involved in the spirituality side of it. It wasn't something I left at 12 or 14. I kept going with it. Was the ban on reincarnation, because I was hearing stories, reading books on what was plainly reincarnation. So what's going on there? That was just one of the things. But I then, looking into it in more depth into my religion, I realized there were lots of things that weren't resonating, that didn't feel right, that just plainly were misinformation as far as I could say it, and realizing that for me, it ended up as being a control model that was stopping the expansion of me exploring what I didn't know. And the interesting thing was, and I'll say this, was the hypocrisy
Yeah.
that I attached to that as well, by looking at those, the whole thing about taking God away from us as a direct connection to only certain hierarchy having that connection, to me didn't make any sense at all. And you grow up with the whole thing, you're a sinner,
Right.
you
Right.
know, and it's all your fault because you were, Eve at the apple. And that right from the very beginning got up my nose. It's like, why is a child feeling like, why am I being blamed for something somebody did centuries and centuries ago? Things like that. There were all those little things that wake you up to saying, you know what, this doesn't feel right. And ultimately, then exploring, as I say, things like reincarnation fascinated me, healing, energy work, meeting intuitives, and seeing how they tapped into information and whatever, and realizing that the caveat on that was not helpful because it meant that that you had to go down a certain path and that was the only path that was okay, and that no longer resonates resonated with me. So it took me time to let that go, like it does for many. But once I let it go, it was like, okay, I don't know what I don't know, but I'm going to let my soul take me where I need to go to understand more of who and what I am.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I mean, again, mentioning our own specific journeys and how we travel along, it's usually a path of having to abandon the ideals, the matrix, the conditioning that we've been taught, as well as people in our lives that are afraid of the changes when they're around other people. I mean, I've experienced that myself. I've seen other people go through the desire to grow and to expand and be held down not only by the people that they've lived with for many years, but also the societal rules and the conditioning of uh, breaking free, of being an individual. But I think once we reach that path of individuality and we've gone down that path, we find we become empowered. I wanted to bring up the subject of near-death experiences because for many people who I interview who've had near-death experiences, they always have some type of an encounter with a being. And it may be a religious figure, but for the most part, I guess it's not distinguishable between human or alien-like. And many people see colors and different beings in different dimensions. So I find it very interesting that they find usually some type of uh, angelic realm, interdimensional realm, or of beings coming through. In your work, what would you distinguish, or how would you categorize the visions or the encounters that people have?
It's a good question, Adam, because we're a product of our programming in that sense, our spiritual programming. For many spiritualists that say their problem has been when they've been in a circle or whatever, and they're connecting, and they've said, but my one of the beings has not been, has not been an angelic being, or it's not been one that's a spirit. It feels like it's non-human intelligence, and having a difficulty in having that accepted within a spiritualist circle or whatever. And one of the things that I've often mentioned is depending on the belief system, really depends on how you're going to have what perception you're going to have of the being you're interacting with. For example, someone may, with a religious background, may say, well, I saw an angel, whereas someone who's not religious will say, I saw a light being or an energy being. Often, I believe it's the same intelligence, but a lot depends on our focus. I remember a young Indian adult writing to me. Um, I wrote about his story in The New Human, and he said to me, Mary, my problem is I know I'm a star seed. He said, and I've always known it. He said, but my countrymen, they've got about 100 gods. And he said, and I know they're extraterrestrial. He says, and they're worshipping them. But I can't say anything to my family about this because they believe they're all gods, but I know they're ETs. This is the thing, isn't it? And I think it's the soul journey that for some people they'll stay within a certain framework because that's where they wish to experience. And for others, they're saying, no, this framework doesn't work anymore. I need to expand my understanding of what is reality, what is consciousness, and how do I operate within that in the best way that feels right, which resonates for me.
Yeah. It's interesting because I read the Akashic records, and in terms of retrieving information, much of it is, I guess, a holographic image or an imagery of the information passed to me, I guess, in the form that I'm able to digest or comprehend. And in terms of relating it to that specific phenomenon or that specific example, like you say, I think we may form certain pathways or certain imagery or parameters that that we then receive that information in that form or in that shape. Um, but I think if we take the curtains away from each specific layer, I think it then reveals itself to a galactic connection. Without the beard, without the skin, without the covering, without the costume, so to speak. And
Yeah.
that's maybe what I'm interpreting out of the situation. Um, we speak about star children, star seeds, and the indigo children, and the different development of their connections to the wisdom that goes beyond the years. and their connection to the spirit world. I know you've done work with people who've had children that are connected and have a connection, and you do work in that area. Could you touch upon that a little bit and what you found and what type of connections they have and the information that they share?
Absolutely. What I've discovered is there's an intergenerational connection. So the connection to the star children, I think we're all star seeds anyway, but I think there's classic or a comprehensive shift in our the latest generations of awareness of that phenomena in the sense that the contact is intergenerational in many cases. So it's going from, right down could be the paternal line or the maternal line. And I will say to parents, was your mum or dad ever a bit different or whatever? And they'd say, oh, granddad or dad was always interested in UFOs or something or other, which already gives me a lineage, if you like, of the connection. But what I was noticing was many of those that were having experiences, the adults that had children, were aware their children were having experiences, but it was different for them. Many of them were not so scared. They talk about their special friend who might be blue with big black eyes. They may talk about going up on spacecraft, talking about what they're learning on spacecraft, talking about being shown how to use their abilities and whatever. So their experience was very different to maybe the fear-based experience that their parents had. And certainly their grandparents, if they were having experiences, would never talk about it because generationally that wouldn't be acceptable in those years ago.
Right.
So what was also important about this was many of the children were given these labels, ADHD, Asperger's, some forms of autism, dyslexia, and I've come across the possibility of bipolar as well.
Yeah.
So I was wondering then, as a researcher, trying to connect the dots, which is what I'm always trying to do. Why is that? Why are they given these labels, or what do these labels actually mean? Are they really dysfunctions as we're told? Or are they, in fact, more of a greater awareness that we're not recognizing? And what I understood from that, and you get these little clues, don't you, when you talk to people? And one of them was with a gentleman in Hong Kong called Neil Gold, who wrote the book Close Encounters of the ADHD Kind.
Wow.
And he always knew, even in his 50s, that he would be given that label nowadays. It wasn't in his framework when he was a kid. And he said, I always saw more of the greater reality, Mary, always. And he retranslated it into always dialed into higher dimensions because that's how he was experiencing it as an ADHD. And then it made me realize that these new so-called these labels may not necessarily indicate dysfunction. They are neurodivergent, certainly. But what they were really doing was exposing new awareness, greater awareness. And we've now got the telepathy tapes, which show that the autistic child is telepathic, for example. That's all come out with Dr. Diane Powell and what have you. I wrote about the new humans' abilities, about how they experience reality was a lot greater or more broader multidimensional abilities, which are being misunderstood because mainstream doesn't recognize these abilities in the way that anyone who looks at consciousness does. And that was when I came up with, the Homo noeticus, the new, and they're called indigos, crystal children, children of light, rainbow children, whatever,
Right.
in a metaphysical terms. But what they're really indicating is the different energy systems. The indigo is a rebel, is come to change the system, for
Yes.
example.
Yes. Yes.
And then each, the others they've got different abilities, like some are healers. I was talking to a 7-year-old a few months ago who said that she can not only do healing, but she activates the healing within the individual themselves so they can do their own healing, for example. She's all of 7. She sees herself as a hybrid. She calls herself a part blue avian, part human, bringing in star language and talking star language, all of 7 years old. So this is what we're leading into now is these new upgrades of human that are very different, but seen by mainstream as some kind of problem, when in fact what they are is showing us the way that we are going into our new paradigm and our awakened state, is how I understand it.
Yeah, I was a physical education teacher, and as a teacher, witnessing children who were autistic, who had ADHD, uh, in my not estimation, but in my observation, in looking upon their behavior, I always noticed a sensitivity to the environment and the necessity to maybe shield themselves from the energies that they couldn't digest or understand. And as I understood myself a little bit better growing up, my sensitivities, my understanding, I guess my telepathic understanding of the communication that existed, the unspoken word that created a lot of tension and anxiety for me growing up in a house where I would understand what was going on, but when I verbalized it, it naturally wasn't validated, but I knew it was what was going on. And I think in some capacity, I think the ego is um, maybe more more available. The ego is pushed to the side a bit and allowed for the connections, the subconscious mind to come through, the naiveness or the childness in ourselves to continue. And I think it expands to our adult life in order to grow and to investigate, trying to put that childlike self into a place where it doesn't reveal itself in the adult world, in many ways. So it's an interesting concept. Are there any specific physical features that you would say, other than the the cognitive aspects? Would you be able to visually recognize an individual as a hybrid or a specific alien connection to the way a person looks?
I think there are certain indicators. There's a certain shape of the forehead that's a lot higher and more ET shaped, if you like. There are a lot of people, I look at them and I'll think he's a hybrid or she's a hybrid or whatever, just simply from the shape of the head. The other physical thing is many of them have Rh negative blood. That seems to be very common. Other characteristics, just that they don't generally behave in a way that's acceptable often, in terms of they're often bullied energetically. It seems that the average child is uncomfortable around some of these children because their energy is different and they often get bullied and what have you. So that's often some of the social behaviors around them as well. One of the things too is many of them don't speak very early because they're telepathic.
Wow.
I remember a wonderful story of a young man telling me that he used to speak telepathically with his sister until she told him to stop being lazy and start talking
Wow.
because they would
Yeah.
telepathically. So a lot of these children don't verbalize very early because they're already tuning in. I remember one mother saying how difficult it was. Her daughter was telepathic from birth. And she said, but the problem is, Mary, she's now 3 years old, and it's very tiring, she said, when you've got to watch your thoughts all the time because you know that they're picking it up. And I think that that would be very scary for a lot of people. I remember a 12-year-old saying that when she goes to school, what the teacher's saying and what she's thinking is very different, and what she's thinking often isn't very nice. So these are abilities that they have, and it may come in that they don't verbalize early, that they because they don't need to, until they realize that it's not that people have to talk on this planet. They often accept it within themselves and think everybody else is the same, but they're not. So that's often an indicator. I've got a questionnaire that I put out for the children, as well as one for adults, because often the parents don't realize just how sensitive the child is and what they're picking up. Like they can pick up emotions by the energy and frequency of your words. For example, they'll see colors and know when mum's angry by the colors of the energy that she's speaking, for example, rather than just the feeling of it, this type of thing. So it's understanding that they are operating on a whole different level to the rest of us, and understanding what that level is. Because telepathic with many of them, certainly, being aware of beings around, connecting to orbs and having conversations with them. I remember an 8-year-old so excited to tell me that she'd been taken up on a ship and shown how to operate it, and then taken to a planet to be shown how to levitate and use more of her psychic abilities. And then she said, they showed me how they are manipulating genetics to seed other planets in other universes and what have you. And really excited to talk about it. But when it comes to being able to share that, then of course they realize that it's not okay. And I think that's been the big issue for a lot of the children. One young man who came to my office, and he was talking about going up on a ship with two of his school friends and being taught to use their mind with other children. Some, he said, weren't human. And I said, how did you know that? And he said, well, their eyes were different. And he said, and we were taught how to work with our mind, and we're taught complex concepts. And I remember saying to him, "Can you tell me some of those the things that you're taught?" And he said, "No, it's too complex for you," was what he told me. In other words, I wouldn't understand. But I said to him, "Did you ever talk to the other two children from your school that came with you?" And he said no, and he got upset. He said, because mum wouldn't let me. And she came in and explained that she didn't want him to appear too weird or strange.
Yeah.
And so she sort of tried to protect him. So a lot of the time, the children don't always realize that it's not normal. They think it's normal. And the problem is then they suddenly realize that not everybody is seeing or experiencing that. And that then creates confusion and frustration often with them. So when I send out a questionnaire for the children, the parents are often amazed at what the children tell them they're experiencing because they haven't even known the questions to ask.
Wow. Yeah, which expands upon the understanding of psychological disorders, and categorizing people or placing people into different positions so that they can better uh, accommodate the needs of children who are experiencing this. That's a very important aspect because as even as adults, as we have the opportunity to go on YouTube and see all the different interviews that now become relatable when years ago there was nobody to communicate this information or share this information with. I just think about all the people who've had these types of experiences, near-death experiences, reincarnation, and the inability to be able to speak that or release that from the soul had to be debilitating. I think what your work itself and what you're doing is a wonderful aspect because as you show, and as I've seen and made communication with people, I understand this to be a very powerful aspect of our human experience. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, the thing for me is what's been heartening since I published The New Human was I was expecting it to be, in most cases just with the metaphysical or the UFO fraternity. I've had clinical psychologists get in touch with me, educators get in touch with me, parents get in touch with me, and saying, look, this is my child, or they're saying we're seeing these children or whatever. And how do we help them? And now there are various groups that are getting together to look at a new way of helping the children with a new kind of curriculum, a new way of supporting them. And I've always said it's going to have to be completely different to anything we've done before because these kids, they come in with the knowing. They're
Absolutely.
already avatars, they're already knowing what they need to know as teachers. Our job primarily is not to teach per se, but to provide the environment for them to grow in the way that they've come here with their mission and their mandate, and give them what they need, nurture them, and make sure that they, are looked after, but also giving them the environment where they can grow and teach us what they most need in terms of to come and do their mission, because many of them are aware of their mission. I mean, I was talking to a 10-year-old that told me he was a center seed, that he'd come to this planet for the first time. And he said, and I'm going to connect to the center of the planet and I'm going to help with the environment and pollution. He was already aware of what he needed to do.
Yeah.
So it's just rather than programming them into this very limiting and limited matrix that we've got, giving them the opportunity to show us more of how they understand reality and educate us into what's best to help them proceed with their journey and their mandate.
Yeah, something crossed my mind. I was thinking in terms of music and entertainment as well in some capacity, because there were many musical groups that gave the group name as something interplanetary. And some of the songs themselves, Alan Parsons Project, The Fifth Dimension, and the Carpenters sang about a song about, I think, a ship or something. So all this stuff has been around, and to think about all the children and the people who've gone over the years, probably unable to really verbalize this and have turned to probably, addictive behaviors, drugs and alcohol, whatever it may be, in order to really avoid or not being able to have an avenue of this. So again, I think it's such, as you just touched upon that. I just wanted to touch upon the genetic engineering program, as you mentioned a little bit before we spoke about that. Maybe you could explain to the audience what that exactly is and what takes place.
Well, my understanding, as a former nurse, I was always interested in where is the physical evidence of what was coming together in terms of my understanding of the wider way, broader way of looking at all of this, and looking at how did this all happen, and then you look at people like the geneticists that talk about the what I would call, what's the word that I want to use? It's gone right out my head.
Okay.
The way that our genetics have been altered by intelligent design primarily. How did that happen? Because we went from Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon, missing link, twice the brain size, 223 genes that were somehow manifesting in our biology. And how did that all happen? And it came very clearly that the gods of old were not gods, but they were in fact non-human intelligences that had visited this planet with technology. So there is your link. And the important thing with all of that is, okay, so if in fact we've been altered by genetic various intelligent design, added DNA from various intelligences, the consensus is maybe 12 different species, could be as many as 22. They've been monitoring our progress as we've evolved as a species. And that's what this continual visitations, I believe, that people are having. And really, from what the children say, and many of the adults, they've been told that this is something that's been done on many, many planets, seeded in many universes and whatever. This is not just planet Earth, but we have a unique blueprint, if you like. When you look at what's going on now, and the reason I think there's been this rapid upgrade, for want of a better word, is because we've reached a technology now and a time where we are literally at the point where we can destroy ourselves. And the only way you can upgrade us is to do what's happening now, and that is actually upgrading the consciousness of the planet to a point where we realize that wars do not work and that we have to start taking responsibility for our galactic heritage and what have you. And Lonnie and many of the experiences that I meet, what we found was something very profound, because there's so much fear attached to, oh, what are they doing to us? This isn't right. We should be informed, and often they are on another level anyway. What we did with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation Research, which is an organization I belong to, or one of the founders, with Dr. Uda Shield, with Ray Hernandez, and with Dr. Edgar Mitchell. We did a survey of 4,200 people globally, 600 questions. And one of the questions was, how has that affected you or changed you through your experiences? And what was fascinating was 85% had a psycho-spiritual transformation. 85%, only 15% remained in fear. So that in itself is huge. And the other interesting fact that came up, and I've got the PDF if you ever would like it. The second thing that came up was 75% of the interactions on board craft were out of body, not physical. So only 25% were actually physically going on board craft, which again, adds to, you saying you don't know whether or not you've had any form of contact. You may very well with your consciousness, but not being aware of it because there was no physical way of elucidating that or working that out. So getting back to the DNA, we have we're only using we apparently 90 what 5% of 100, 5 to 10% of our DNA is active. The rest they call dormant DNA. 1 gram of DNA can take the information of all the information on the internet can be put into 1 gram of DNA.
Wow.
So what is the DNA really holding? What are we activating when people become more aware? We have no idea what's hidden in our DNA and what we're actually accessing when we go into the holographic nature of it anyway, and the what's stored there. And this is what I think is being triggered by the frequencies on the planet now, by healers, by experiences and what have you, and bringing more of the greater reality of consciousness and awakening to the population is because our DNA is being activated. And this, to me, is the most fascinating part of this because it's a physical manifestation of what's going on multidimensionally. And, with people, the last few years have been amazing. Some from 2012 have had an activation completely in the material world saying, my whole world's changed. I had a contact experience, or I had a near-death experience, or I had an out-of-body experience, or I started remote viewing, or I started doing healing, or whatever. And then my whole world shifted and changed. And the last few years has been dramatic,
Absolutely.
absolutely dramatic shift. Where they'd say, this wasn't part of my world 2 years ago. I was very much in the materialistic world, doing the usual thing, and now all of a sudden, none of it's any is. I've lost all interest in it, complete lost interest, and this is what I'm seeing as part of this activation that's going on globally through different, depending on the soul, depends on how they choose to wake up.
Yep.
I believe, and we're all a different way of doing that. They're all connected because they're waking up to not only the world of spirit, but the world of the interdimensionals, the extra dimensionals, the transdimensionals, all of those other aspects of the greater reality. And the beings that and the intelligence is not all physical, because when I'm working with someone who wants to connect to, I'll say, who are you communicating with? You're getting downloads. Many of them are getting downloads like languages, information, scripts, symbols, and what have you as part of their contact. And I'm saying, well, where does it come from? And they may say, well, I think some of it may be my superconscious higher self, but some of it comes from an intelligence of some sort.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, okay, so who's that intelligence? Don't know. Let's find out. And often when they connect and bring their clairvoyance in, they see it's a blue being, or it could be a lion being, a feline. It could be a light being. And they're completely, what, not only surprised because everyone I think expects the spirit guides to be, maybe a North American Indian or a Tibetan monk or something or
Right.
other. They don't expect to see a mantis being, for example, or
Right.
whatever. And so it surprises them. And they're saying, but it's not looking human. I said, well, yeah, because, often the connection that you've got with this being is that you may very well have been family or part of because that's the other thing they find out. May have come, their soul may have already been from Sirius or Andromeda or Arcturus or whatever. And one of the ways that I work with someone is when they're in that altered state is where is your star family lineage? And they may say Andromeda or from another galaxy or from another interdimensional space or whatever. But it all starts to come back to them, and you, with your awareness, knows how that works. And that's what is awakening them to see the greater reality of who they are as a soul, coming into this planet and the mandate that they've come in with and their awareness and who they're connected to as part of family. And so this is how it's all shifted. The more you understand, the more you understand your reason for being here and why you've experienced what you've experienced and what you've come here to do.
Yeah, I think what's amazing is the infusion of alien DNA into the human experience in order to raise the level of consciousness and somehow become a lighthouse of information and frequency. Um, and again, as I spoke to you earlier, I've had many experience. I wouldn't say many experiences. I've had dreams and I've had encounters of ships near me, as well as big blue orbs that went off like right in front of my car by the airport, which was interesting. And it was in the middle of winter. I thought it was like the 4th of July where like a Roman candle would explode, but it was a blue ball that just lit up right in front of my car. And I had no idea what that specifically was. Um, and then I saw a ship on the beach like 12 o'clock in the afternoon to the
Oh,
right. And when I looked at it, it took off on a 45-degree angle. And then just dreams itself of ships passing overhead with lights flashing, communication. I heard a woman speaking to me. And then had encounters thereafter with somebody that encountered that contacted me in this three-dimensional
yeah.
world. So for me, it's such an interesting concept because if had I not had those experiences, naturally I wouldn't have the interest. But again, once I think you go up that road of discovery, and I think you're led
Yeah.
on a soul level to go up that road. And I think if you resist, I think like anything, when your soul is calling, if you don't listen to those messages, then we wind up breaking down physically. So I think the road towards expansion only helps us to become healthier and stronger. And this information, again, it becomes inspiring for those who understand what we're talking about. And as you know, and I've seen there are many people who are on this path.
I think, Adam, what I'm hearing from you is you've been contacted for sure. And what the phenomena around you is little wake-up calls to say, we're here, we're here. And often what people don't realize when they're seeing those kind of phenomena, there's often information downloads that you're not consciously aware of. There's contact happening. And as you say, little synchronicities start to come and what have you as well. When I've had many people come to me and say, I know I've got a mission, I've got something to do, but I don't know what it is yet. And I've said to them many times, your soul doesn't let you miss the bus. It's
Wow.
worked too darned hard to get you. So just relax because you won't be able to miss it.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes just about letting go and trusting because I think, right, particularly at this moment in time, we're kind of in a holding phase at a crossroads at the moment, which is waiting for something
Yeah.
to manifest. And I think everyone's feeling that quite strongly.
Yeah, I think, many of the major themes around UFOs and alien contact is the fact that when will the higher authorities validate the things that many people believe? And I think the important thing for us to do is, I guess, is to navigate our own existence based upon our own GPS as opposed to waiting for validation from a higher source because that's not the way that's going to work. And I think as you're saying, and I know for myself, sharing with like-minded people who are on the same frequency of understanding is the path of connection and the path of bringing other people into that understanding if they're ready or if they have that motivation. I wanted to touch upon your two books, The Awakening, right? How extraterrestrial contact can transform your life, and The New Human. And maybe you could just share a little bit about and a synopsis of what the first book and the second book are about.
Well, awakening was because so many people were contacting me, Adam, saying, I don't know if this is real. I don't know if I'm going crazy. What do I do about the fear? My kids are having experiences, all these kind of questions. And it was the same questions over and over again. Many of them were afraid to go to traditional help like psychologists or psychiatrists because ultimately we know what that would be interpreted as. So I thought, well, the only thing I can do is write a kind of manual which is, how do you know this is real? How do you know you're not crazy? What do you do about the kids? What do you do if you have missing pregnancies? What do you do if you get downloads? So it was a kind of way of helping them to self-help more than anything through this experience if they've got no one around them to talk to, because often the problem is even the family don't want to hear about it. They're frightened, they don't want to hear, or they don't understand, or they do think you're crazy, or all
Right.
those kind of things. So it can be a very solo, very insular solo journey and very scary. So if you've got no, and also how do you find help? What's the difference between a researcher and a counselor that, because a researcher is just interested in data, they're not going to help you with your journey of the experience. You need someone who understands the phenomena and can help you through understanding your experiences and whatever. So don't have it go to a UFO group and think they're all going to be able to help you necessarily, because they may just be interested in the sightings and the craft that you've taken pictures of, not necessarily how that's affected you on
Right.
your daily life. So those kind of things. So awakening was really that. It was giving them a package to help them work their way through their own journey. The new human was really because so many adults and children were having extraordinary experiences, and that in itself with their awareness. And it was like, if your child is saying this, this, and this, what's actually going on? And so I put in some of the stories, not only of the children and their understanding of who they are, why they're known as star kids and star children, and also mentioning the things that were seen as neurodivergent, like ADHD, and what do you do if your child's ADHD and you're advised to medicate them? Is there another way? Yes, there is. I worked with a molecular biologist in Sweden who had the same diagnosis, who was working holistically, and she came up with they need more choline, for example. They need different, more of certain minerals and whatever, a different kind of diet. You don't have to medicate them. So it wasn't just highlighting the story, it was saying, how can we help in a holistic way? So I was looking for solutions to helping and also getting the parents to understand why they're different, why they behave differently, why they see things in a broader perspective, because their abilities are, for example, they have 5 times more sensitivity to touch, for example, broader visual acuity, more sensitive hearing in the physical realm, but they're also more multidimensional. They see energies, they pick up thoughts. They are very clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient. They've got all these extra senses. So when you are with them, you've got to be aware that it's a completely different way they're operating from, and giving them parents the understanding of, well, it's because they see this or they experience this. So it helps them to understand the child, but also how to support them as well. So it was all of that. So for me, it was not just the stories, but the awareness. How do you support that? All of that was really, really important. And then talking about the adults, their experiences, the upgrades from the Star Kids to Homo noeticus. What does that look like? What is their mission? And then I looked at religion and what are religions saying about this? And of course, that was a minefield in itself because of my own background. And believe it or not, Catholicism is the only one that I know of that is actually Monsignor Corrado Beducci is no longer with us, was at the Vatican, and he was a demonologist, and he said it's not demons, and it's not possession, it is a real experience.
Wow.
So he was validating the fact that they know that this is real.
Yeah.
So I was putting together, and also I used 2 ministers of religion, their stories, and one of them, Jeff, who lives in Australia, explained that he'd always known about these experiences, working as a minister, but making it very difficult for him to open that up to his community or his religious community, because it wasn't in line with what the dogma of his religion and the conflict that created, for example. So it was really highlighting all of that. So I tried to cover as many different issues as I possibly could in the New Human that people come across more for empowerment, for validation, for ways of getting a greater understanding. And one of the things I did try and say was I didn't censor any of the data because it might conflict with people. Because this is what is the problem, is when you say, well, that's not acceptable, because we don't know what we don't know. You
Right.
can't censor what you don't know. Just because it's not your reality doesn't mean it isn't real. If it's real for that person, it's real for that person. So I was very clear to say, and if it scares you, that's good because you need to look at why it scares you, because it's probably telling you something.
Absolutely.
Don't run away from the fear. Find out what the fear is about and why. So that was, in essence, the new human.
Now, if anybody who has any of these thoughts, these experiences, and wants to go further investigating their own journey in terms of hypnosis or their connection to their galactic family, is there a way that they can contact you to get that work done?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, I've got a website, acern.com.au and maryrodwell.com.au, but I also am on Facebook, Telegram, and Messenger and what have you. Generally, they're the ways most people contact me and what have you. So it's relatively easy, Adam.
Yeah. And if you could leave us with some type of insight or information that you think is relevant or important for people to take home or to hear at the end of this interview, what would you offer them?
I would say to them, trust your resonance to truth, because at the moment there is so much disinformation out there and conflicting views. You are your own best teacher, you're your own best student. You have that within you to resonate to truth. Listen to your heart. More than anything else, you are the only instrument that you can really fully trust.
On that note, I want to thank you for being my guest and adding the inspiration and the support and confidence in understanding the, the variations and the possible opportunities for our own growth and being comfortable with that. And at least having a support system of people who are educated and have researched the material and being a pillar of inspiration for them. So I want to thank you.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for doing this as well, because without you, this information doesn't get out there. So thank you for your commitment to all of that. And it's been wonderful to talk with you.
You as well. Thank you.